The definition of what most people would recognize as a classic out-of-body experience is when you believe yourself to be separate from the body, and that belief is reinforced very strongly because you look back and see your body. Now, this happens in near-death experiences, in surgery cases, or in automobile cases where people have a very definite experience of saying, I am separate from my body because look, there's my body right down there. That was the kind of classic out-of-body experience that Bob Monroe first had, in that he actually felt himself on the ceiling, believing himself to be in some sort of body, and then say, well, who's that down in my bed? And realizing that this might be death process. Of course it wasn't. It was just an interesting experience. In later years, I remember asking Bob, because he wrote in his book very carefully, well, yes, so you still have all of your body parts. You don't have to worry about that. You're still going to be okay, and so forth and so on. And I said, so Bob, it's been a number of years now. Do you still think of yourself as being a physical body or an astral body or a second body? And he said, well, you know, I think that was more of a habit. He says, if I could say anything, I think I'm more of a spot of light now. And that the idea of having a body was maybe a habit that I had. And so I just sort of, I mean, in that realm, thought is thing. Therefore, you can think yourself up a body. And he says it was sort of trying to intellectualize his experience. He was saying it was sort of like I had the habit of having a body, and it just sort of carried over. Now, if we go over into other traditions, the bardos are said to be a place where you have a second body, but that second body is sloughed off when you move out of the bardos onto higher spiritual realms. It itself dissolves away, much like this physical body dissolves away on the planet. This, then, is the classic description of an out-of-body experience, that you look back and you see this other thing we think is our physical body. But that's not, by far not the most common out-of-body experience. The most common out-of-body experience is that you just wake up, meaning become conscious, and you are elsewhere. And finding yourself elsewhere, you do whatever is appropriate in that elsewhere location. And then later you find yourself back here and you say, well, what about where I just was? And then you realize, oh, well, I wasn't here, I was someplace else. And then sometimes we just call it a dream, but you never know. So it's much more common that you just find yourself somewhere else rather than standing there and looking back and seeing your body. It in fact might be sort of a psychological defense mechanism, because so many people get fearful of death when they look back at their body. But if they just wake up someplace and carry on with what they're doing there, then they aren't concerned about, wait a minute, I must be dead. You know, they don't even have that thought. They're too busy doing what they're doing. So the next question is, well, where is this other place? I just find myself awake. Well, let's go back for a minute to Bob Monroe's stories. In his first experimentation of being in bed, feeling this sort of vibration of puffing up and collapsing, puffing and collapsing, puffing and collapsing, that he got over the fear of that. And then when he could feel himself sort of loose, as it were, then he would push that other hand that he perhaps thought he had down through the floor. And he could feel the insulation and the nails and so forth, and he'd pull his hand back up. And then he began to experiment in his house, and then his neighborhood, and then there were a few earthly places he went to. And then there were beings that he met and said, come with me and I'll show you something else. He called that in his first book Locale 2, meaning that Locale 1 was this earth stuff. And he became fascinated in this other realm called Locale 2, which was just, there's here and then there's the other place. This is locale 1, that's locale 2. In his later books, he found there are many other places, other worlds, other dimensions. And this is really boring and primitive. You know, people say, well, gee, if they got out of their body, they might be able to go find out such and such. And it's like, what a boring thing. You know, if I get out of my body, why would I be interested in going to the beach when I can go to anywhere in the universe? And the universe is a really big place, you know. So the where you go to, apparently from our ability to understand, based on our own experience and our command of the language, the where you go to seems to depend upon your intent. So the way in which you can declare or purify or objectify your intent seems to be the navigational beacon or tool that takes you to wherever this other place is, other than this local world, or what Bob called locale 1.